My Inner Knowing, empowering you to find your compass for the journey. We are dedicated to supporting you to rediscover and trust your natural ability to navigate life each day by sharing insight and experience through the lens of two professional communicators and their guests. We intend to prompt internal inquiry that supports all those willing to explore a unique path. Hello.
Well, hello.
We like to drop in with that. So,
Hello.
Yeah. How are you, Carley?
I am great, actually. Very excited to be here and sharing with the both of you and with the audience that is listening in.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, we always dive right in, and then we circle back around to things later. So when you think about for you what your inner knowing is, what it feels like, how can you best describe that?
It is such a work in progress, to let you know this piece. I feel like in reflecting on that question, what I've come up with is that it is such an organic process of alchemy that goes on in my body, that is working with learning how to trust that inner knowing. And even though that inner knowing might come up and it might be very present for me, because it really, it's like, how do I want to say this? It's like so much of the dense, heavy energy that has been there, holding it, maybe in a more detached way, harder to access. That is sort of breaking away, and it's much more easy to access that inner knowing. And yet it still involves an organic process of being physical, the physicality of being in my body, digesting and processing and feeling into what that inner knowing is. And as that starts to happen, there is this trust of knowing, and it's a feeling. It's like it's in me, and it resonates with a frequency, of a feeling, that often comes with goosebumps or tears or a physical sensation in my body that is so much more accessible now, because it's not just in this place of being detached. It comes, and I sit with it and go through the process of digesting it and honoring it and knowing that it is there and it is guiding me, and to trust it. It's a process of trusting. So, it's an interesting, I don't know if that answers your question, because it's been such a place of understanding that it is definitely an alchemical process of working with physicality and trusting that inner knowing, which is the truth. It's understanding that that truth is there, and it resonates through a feeling.
You mentioned several times, Carley, the word trust. How do you, as best you can recall, how did you go about building that trust in yourself?
I think part of it is that it's probably already, throughout most of it, it's there, but we're not aware of it in every single choice that we make. But we're not conscious of that trust. It guides us, and what I think of this example for myself, when, and I can give it as a clear example. It's like every part in my 50s, I started opening I had a new level of freedom, having raised my kids and launched them into the world. And I have 5 daughters and a blended family, and there's been definitely loss in that family, coming through loss of a parent, either through divorce or through death. So my focus was on raising those kids. And then when when they were launched, there became an opening, a little bit of a channel for me to be able to, to listen a little clearer. But so much was shut down in my body. I had so much density and so much resistance there that I wouldn't even been able to call it resistance, but it was like
Mm.
heavy, dense energy. But there was a
Yeah.
moment when, my husband, shared with me, he went through a process and he came back all excited and he said, I can see you and I doing this work together, which was the shamanic realm. It was doing breath work, shamanic breath work. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I needed too much control over my life to allow something like that into it. You mean like lie on the floor to loud shamanic music and breathe and have visions? There was a lot of resistance,
Mm.
so, but but in spite of that, when the opportunity came up and I was really wanting to go to Chile with some excursion and adventure that was opening me up, my body led me to do the shamanic healing initiatory process, to do SHIP, even though every
Mm.
part of me said no. So,
Mm.
I think that the detachment, was there and the resistance, but the truth, the trust still led me to the next right step. And it allowed me to
Mm.
show up there. And, I grew up trying to make sure everybody was happy and to, my people pleasing and making sure nobody was upset with me so I wouldn't be abandoned or rejected was so strong that for me
Yeah.
to show up at this workshop, this training, which was a whole month long, and to show up and actually say out loud, I don't want to be here in a group of
Mm.
people was like, it was an antithesis. It was not me, but it let me know that my soul guided me to that next step, even though I was resistant. So I think we
Mm.
often have that. We go, but we're detached. We shut down, but we follow it through. I think the process as it unfolds is melting,
Mm.
releasing, working through and digesting all of that resistance, all of those things that have been our blocks. As we begin to heal ourselves, those things begin to open the pathways to trust that inner knowing stronger. But so much defense, we've had so many defense mechanisms blocking it that we've, not easily been able to access it, but we still move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. That's lovely. Yeah. What are you thinking?
I love the melting metaphor. It really resonated with me. And the other thing that you said that I thought was great too is honoring that knowing once you see it, having an intentional recognition. To me, just sounds so important to be able to put myself back in that space more and more often.
Yes, yes.
You know,
And that's where I think it's continually being an alchemical process because we learn to
right?
trust it more and more. You know, even though our head, our thoughts are like, I can't do this, or this is too scary, or whatever it is. The more that we begin to release and melt or digest or process those wounds, the density begins to dissipate. The,
Yeah.
the defense mechanisms begin to, soften. They don't have to be so guarded and protected. We learn to trust that inner knowing, and we learn to find a way to balance risk with safety in a brand new way.
Mm.
Nice.
Yeah. Upon reflection, Carley, when you think about the resistance, what are you aware of now that you were struggling to let go of?
Control.
Control.
Yeah, control, growing up, with childhood wounds, and particularly for me, a great deal of loss. Um,
Mm.
you know, um, loss of control of things, that were hard, with parents dying and a sister dying and, and other things, accidents that happened where someone, one of the siblings almost died. And then for myself, I lost a husband with two small children. So there was a
Mm.
lot of loss. And with that loss becomes, for myself, with unprocessed and having to step right into life without digesting it, my way of managing that was try to control it, to make sure that I had, that I was the only driver in any car.
Mm.
To make sure that I was always one step of my kids in terms of their going out into the world. How can I make sure that they are safe, or
Yeah.
anybody in my life is safe? So there were ways that I was even unconscious with that were over controlling, and that manifested in more dense, heavy energy and less ability to consciously access that inner knowing. Even though I know it was still there and it still guided me, it wasn't
Yeah.
as clear.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you. That's so helpful. And then you go on this month-long experience, and what were you aware of? I mean, again, as best as you can recall, that started shifting things or uncovering things or
It
releasing
was
things.
it was realizing the resistance to going through change, and as things began to move, and one of the tools that I was able to access was the Shamanic Breathwork tool, which initially, when my husband first introduced it to me, I'm like, oh no. But it's the most amazing tool, and it so aligns with my body and what it needs to move energy. It's like a friend of mine, Ruby Faulkner, said it's like the Roto-Rooter of energy work. And it takes you on a metaphorical journey to access whatever wants to come to you. So it's physical, but it's also metaphysical. So archetypes come and visions come, and it started opening me up at such a profound level that I could no longer deny that I am interfaced with the world around me, and that there are all of these messengers and messages that are constantly working with us on a daily basis. So my vision of the world just totally expanded, and I began to see that there is a bigger picture here than I could have ever possibly imagined, and everything's in right. Everything's in right relationship. It's like both understanding the physicality and also that there's a higher perspective.
Yeah.
So I moved that dense energy, related to the grief held in my body. And I think that was one of the most profound ones, is to, when I started to move that energy, to see how it was lodged physically in my body and how it moved through almost like sludge as it was releasing from my body, totally not, totally foreign, and not in my awareness of understanding that this experience, particularly the loss of my father when I was 21 years old, took up a space in there. And through this process of doing breath work and the shamanic healing initiatory process, because it's designed as a process of working through the elements and working through a birth process, essentially a rebirth process, I moved that dense energy, and it was like, I could feel it. It was, when it came out, it was like stuck in my field, like this fog. But I had so trapped it internally that I didn't even know it was there, affecting how I navigated in the world. So, it just came out. And then the magic of it all is like the very last day of this whole month long, when I'm, essentially working with the energy of the dragon, because that's what came up for me, is going into the dragon's cave, which was where this energy of loss, of death resided, and recovering that, bringing that back. It was such an amazing piece, because what happened was the day that I did that ritual happened to be the 35th anniversary of my father's death.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can't make that up.
No.
And then a year later, because in that process, then I opened, and that intuition came in a direct call for me to go to Africa to be with the white lions. That's when the intuition said, you can't, not my intuition. My intuition said, you need to go. I got a call. The white lion said, you need to go. And every part of me is like, my head, you can't go. You don't have the money for that. Who do you think you are? You're not good enough. You're not, you won't be safe. What will it be expected of you? All the things that we can, put in front of our faces, to block us, to try to keep us safe, are these old stories, right? These are stories that have kept us small, stories that have kept us safe, stories that we have actually, or maybe were put on us and we took in to feel safe. So I had to work through all those and to just trust that inner knowing, which then became very much associated with the inner lion. We all have this inner authority, and it is our inner lion, or as Starwolf might say, it's the inner shaman. It's this inner wise guide, listening to that and then making that choice to go. Because the call was strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is fascinating how themes come up in our conversations with people, because the last person we interviewed that touched on the same area. So the universe, I think, is there's some learning for all of us in that particular aspect for some reason. Just fascinating. But why is it, do you think, that we put those barriers in our own way? For some reason, as humans, our brain wants to react to that knowing with a barrier of I can't, or I'm not good enough, or there's not enough money, or whatever it is that keeps us from doing.
It's a great question. I don't think that it's done consciously. I think it comes from a place inside of us that really wants to protect us. Some might call that our ego, and some might associate the ego with being bad. Ego isn't bad, and how I see it. The ego has been overdeveloped, and it comes from a place of trying to keep us safe. So safety becomes the paramount, and it blocks anything else, in an attempt, to keep us safe. And if it's been very well developed, with most of us it has been, staying small or staying contained or staying isolated seems to be safer, because we're operating from that, probably, if we wanted to look at it, it's where that trauma first happened, essentially being in a place of regression, and not, and again, not demonizing or, saying regression is a bad thing. It's understanding regression was a place of keeping us safe. So our 5-year-old might say, it's afraid to speak up in class, or it's afraid, to share its opinion. It will do whatever it can to make sure mom and dad are happy, or a teacher is happy, or siblings are happy. Or it may do the opposite. It may be the catalyst in the family that is the rebel and will act out all of that in attempt, because that's how it sees itself as being safe, is to be the anger representative in the family, or the rage representative in the family. So the barriers get developed, and then our job as adults is to essentially go in and reparent them.
I agree. And just the thought occurred to me, maybe we are being put through a lesson of moving energy. I don't know, but I love the question, and I love the way you answered it, because it makes a lot of sense.
So can you elaborate, like a lesson in moving energy?
Yeah. You're just, my thought process is right off the cuff, as just, we are, I think we come here to learn, right? And if we are going to take on greater responsibilities in the energetic world, the spiritual world, then we need to learn how to move past barriers. So maybe we create the barriers for that purpose. or maybe they're put in front of us for that purpose. I don't know. I think we have a big part in it, maybe all the part in it, but that's just where I am this morning, that's what it feels like to me,
And I'd say
because I can't understand why we would do it otherwise,
it's I mean, I see it as a trauma response, and we're in a
Sure.
time right now, where we're seeing how trauma, which is, in my interpretation of it, is unprocessed things that have happened generation after generation in our lineage, and it has set us off course. We are out of alignment, with the natural world. We have disconnected from each other and from the natural world to, in an attempt to either, express ourselves as a tyrant or the victim. And essentially we hold both of those because they're really aspects of ourselves that are undeveloped. And it really is that right and left brain too, right? We call it masculine, feminine, but it's essentially, life force energy with, consciousness. And how do we bring these things together? And it is energy. It's like understanding we are energetic beings in a physicality, and even that physicality is energy. And now as we make it conscious, because I think I got goosebumps, as we make it conscious, then the energy fields begin to open, and we begin to dialogue now with the frequencies in a whole new way to make then a purposeful action in the world.
Yeah.
I don't know if that-
Beautiful. Oh, it's beautiful. I love it. I want to go back really quick before I lose this, but when you said I got the call about the white lions, can you tell us more about getting the call on the white lions?
It's interesting how things kind of come, to us. I did that work, I did a whole month long, and just opened up some deep, deep healing in my body, particularly related to my father and my sister dying, but then also my husband, because all three of them died suddenly in a car accident. So it was really a big process for me of healing, in addition to my own childhood stuff. And, so having graduated or, from that program, I could choose to be a master facilitator. And I actually brought this program, we became an umbrella of Venus Rising here in Springfield, Illinois. We are a Hara spiritual community, a congregation of it. So we started a congregation, but I also needed to do my master practitioner work. And part of that was they were having a guest speaker at Venus Rising named Andrew Harvey. And he is a mystic and wrote numerous books. He's a scholar. He's just an extraordinary, man. And he was going to be speaking on the Inner Beloved at one of these workshops, the workshop on spirit, because there's 5 different initiations, and one of them is spirit. And a friend of mine said, Carley, you ought to go see him, because you don't want to miss an opportunity. So, I'm like, okay, I'll sign up for this one, and I'll do my master practitioner work. And so it was in a very small space that Andrew was doing his teaching. But before I wanted to know more about him. And I saw on a YouTube video him interviewing Linda Tucker, who is the keeper of the White Lions. And she wrote The Mystery of the White Lions, which is an extraordinary book. But I saw just a little brief interview of her being interviewed by Andrew about the time that her Jeep broke down in the middle of the bush, and what that was like, anticipating, because they went out into the Jeep and at dusk to see if maybe a white lion had been born, because a cub was pregnant and there hadn't been one in, I don't know, over a decade. And so the Jeep broke down, and they were faced with this catastrophic, like they were in the middle of a pride of lions. And, this touched me. I mean, I'd been to Africa. I lived in Nigeria briefly for a year when I was younger. And so Africa, I love Africa. So this story, and to know that they were trapped and they were in this process that was life or death, really, because the lions were encroaching. That story touched me. And the biggest piece of that story was that out of this came a woman who was a local woman with a baby on her, strapped on her back, wearing the local colorful dress. And she had a young boy, a teenage boy, and a 7-year-old girl with her. And she walked through the Pride of Lions and climbed into the Jeep, and the lions became pacified. So there was a huge,
Wow.
there was something that happened. And Linda talks a lot about that. Linda talks about it. And it's a big story, but it touched me. So that informed me. So I'm sitting here with Andrew as he's teaching about hope in a time when everything, this was in 2011, October, when everything in our world is falling apart. And you can actually see that now, and his teachings are about, like, how do we have hope when all of this stuff is going on? I'm sitting in the front row with Andrew on the floor, and he says something, and I'm like, okay, I want to comment on this. I don't even remember what it was. But before he comments on me, he says something about the white lions. And in that moment, after he said that, he called on me. And it was like there was a transfer of energy in such a way that it blasted. I mean, I could feel that energy connection to my heart space, and it just blasted open. So when I opened up my mouth to speak, all I could do was sob. I couldn't speak at all. I had some awakening moment here in this transfer of energy. And then I went into a breath work later, and in the breath work, 2 of them, back to back within a day apart, I got a strong message: you need to come to Africa. In this breath work, I met that woman. She came to me. Her name is Maria Koso, Lion Queen of Timbavati, came in the breath work, and then the white lion Mara came, who was the one that was predicted to come to Earth at a time when the Earth was going through huge ecological changes. I didn't know it was Mara, but when I drew it later, I could see that it was this lion and that call. And it was a little frightening, to tell you the truth, because I had no idea what this would mean. And I think this is intuition. We are called to whatever it might be. There is an urging. And sometimes it's really big, like this one was, and I'm like sharing it with my husband, and I'm already back home. And I'm like, I think I need to go to Africa with this group, because actually Starwolf and Andrew was taking a group, and Starwolf and Brad, and Brad is no longer living, but they were going to go on this trip. And I felt like I was supposed to go on this trip. That was one way that I could make this happen. And my husband's like, can't you just work with it in town, like with your imagination? Do you have to spend all this money to do this? But he went into a breath work with that question, and he came out like, if you are called, you need to go. So that his permission, and not permission like I need to get my husband's permission to do this, but his acknowledgement that if I have a call, I need to go, allow that to happen. And it turned out that I went. Starwolf and Brad were not able to go on this one, but I went with Andrew Harvey in March of 2012. And that, and then I've been 7 times since. This will be my 8th time. I've got a journey that I'm leading next March, which will be my 8th time to South Africa. And, and everything, and I urge everyone to know that you can't know what that next right. I mean, you know what the next right step is, but you don't know what that's going to lead to. And my mind created all kinds of scenarios of what that meant. None of them came true. It was literally a calling of that inner knowing each time to the next right step. And with it came, and I think you said this a little bit, that a challenge to break through some perception that I had that it was supposed to look a particular way. And I was met with an obstacle, a barrier. And I had to work with that barrier to understand that there was something else, and that is I think that's the alchemy. We can't have growth without there being some impetus of a challenge, for us. And we want it easy, because we don't want to go through the pain. And yet the pain is a part of the alchemy, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
anyway, that's a long answer to your question. That's the calling. That was
No,
the
I
biggest. That
just,
was the biggest one. It's,
Yeah.
probably
sure.
that I've had. There have been more that were smaller, like I got an invitation from a friend. He said, "You need to come, Carley. We're going to go see the humpback whales." And I'm like, well, this isn't one of those big, profound ones. But I knew in that inner knowing that I needed to go. And
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
profound.
Yeah.
It was profound.
Mm.
Going to the mountain gorillas was another one. I knew I needed to go to the mountain gorillas and connect with them energetically. It was critical, even though I didn't know why. So it became
Yes.
not about the lions. It became about, they were my inner authority. They were the apex predator, the guide, but it was also connected to all of these other steps to connect other beings in a relationship, that understood they were all here supporting the world through changes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Carley, will you share with us what is the work that you do now? What are
Yeah,
you sharing with people?
that's a very good question, because this is the work that I'm sharing. And I can feel the emotion of that,
Yeah.
It is, these teachings, these connections, as I bring them back, they inform me and they inform others. So we are now in relationship, co-creating with these animals, with this land, with understanding the bigger picture, why Africa has called to me in the first place. It is where we all came from. This is in our DNA. There's a bigger picture of understanding Africa itself. If you divide this continent in half, there is an energetic line. When the land masses were all one, when we were Pangea, it was like the earth land masses were one. The center of that landmass is the 31st meridian, which is the energetic longitudinal meridian that connects these sacred sites that I have been to, with the white lions. They are on this energetic meridian. It's called the golden seam. It is the spine of our earth. It's to see earth as a living, breathing entity with her own energetic spine. And that all of these meridians and energetic lines and nadis are coming from the earth, and they inform our whole planet, and they all have barriers. And we are in the process of releasing these barriers. That the teachings that I teach now are that when we work on our own bodies and open up these meridians and these areas where we have had these traumas, dense traumas not process and digest, that as we open them, we open the earth's meridians, and the earth's meridians and us begin to dance together. We could begin to find right relationship again with the earth. So it's, this is part of that work. And so I do the shamanic healing initiatory process, which is this process that was created by Linda Starr Wolf. And we operate, we just are entering our 12th year of offering that. It's every other month, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, deep dive into these elemental pieces, water, earth, fire, spirit, and air, and connecting with a whole new birth process, going from understanding how we move through change to working with family of origin, to working with the shadow, to working with loving ourselves, the inner beloved, to then working and understanding our purpose in the world, why we are here. And so that's one of the works. And then I created, along with several people here in our community, through a crisis of my own, where I ran up into an obstacle that caused me great pain, and I thought I was being strangled. It was like an old memory in my body. And what birth was that was a warriorship program, a shamanic warriorship path, so others can work with these beings. Like that inner knowing through the lion is the very first one. There are 4 core ones, and then we've built on that to include the other animals. So we have the core ones are lion, dragon, which is interesting because that was such a big part of my first, and then we have tiger and eagle, and tiger came a little bit later, but each of those are associated with the elements. And the second tier involved whale, elephant, hyena, and mountain gorilla. And so working with these animals, we are co-creating because they're teaching us and we are also supporting them on the planet. So we're collaborating with each other and igniting a new kind of warrior energy inside of us. And this warrior is not the warrior, it's the warrior that can hold the other with love and compassion and holding an energetic field that allows us to, not try to force change, not try to control, not, it's like really, it's about being centered in our own, heart, and strength and inner knowing to hold that space, and hold the other in that reflection of love, light, and truth, essentially. So those are the two major ones. And then we also take people on psycho-spiritual journeys, mostly to Africa, to be with the energetic frequencies there. And I'm also, I'm an energy worker. And so I see people for energy work, and I'm a psychotherapist. So I still have my private practice. But this work has so informed it. And and it's most recently, I'm just going to add this, and I know I'm probably saying a lot, but more recently I'm working on a deeper understanding of family constellation work or systemic constellation work. And I just got back from a intensive training in Lisbon. It's really helping me understand how we can access those morphogenetic fields, and learn so much as we do, because this is, again, understanding energy and where those barriers or blockages have been in our energy field. So
you are busy.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
I am. Yeah.
If somebody was looking at your offerings, your programs, would you suggest they do the shamanic healing initiatory process first before the warrior program, or does it not matter?
It's encouraged, but you don't have to. If you've done some other of your work, people come in, to either one of them. It was initially designed because people go through SHIP and they're like, what's next? So this then helps them develop us, and it's been amazing to see how it has complemented and supported people in finding that inner strength through that, through that process of connecting with a warrior in a new way. But you can enter them either way. You don't have to attend SHIP. So either one, we've got.
And then I'll let you get a question in here in just a second.
Okay.
I'm fascinated. So breath work, it's coming, I believe, more and more into mainstream, at least in my observation. And I was hoping you could just describe it briefly for our listeners so they understand if they haven't been exposed to it.
Yeah, I have been certified in Shamanic Breathwork, which was trademarked by Linda Starwolf. But there's a lot of different kinds of breathwork out there. This one initially was in part developed through holotropic breathwork with Stan Groth. And Stan developed it, in addition to others. She also worked with Jackie Small. But the holotropic breathwork was initially started because, Stan Groth, as a psychiatrist, was doing, that's when a lot of experimentation, they were using, like LSD and other, drugs that help people access these states of consciousness that we don't easily access. And when they could no longer access, and they could no longer use them anymore because of the legality around using them, and he's a psychiatrist, so he was doing it in a very medicinal way. And we see a resurgence of that right now. There are a lot more medicinal practices that are coming from these substances to help people access those states of consciousness, where sometimes those barriers are so constricted that we can't access them. And I think maybe part of what it does is it releases those egoic barriers that want to keep us safe, and allows us to access the information to see how we are these spiritual beings in a human body. But so breath work ended up coming as a result of not being able to use that. He started, visiting different, tribes and indigenous wisdom, from different countries, and created the holotropic breath work as a way to access it. But it's really to understand that we've always had this ability to do that. Yes, we can access plant medicine. It can be there for us. It can help us access this, but it's also within our own bodies that we can access this. And breath is one way to do it. And with shamanic breath work, it's like doing hyper-oxygenated breath. And doing that, then there's some drumming, which connects us with the earth, because it also holds us energetically to the earth and grounds us into the earth. And then we have, loud, evocative movie soundtrack music that's played, and it takes you through the chakras, and starts with those lower chakras, and there's no words with it. It's just music. And usually, when we do one, it's about an hour long, but I can do one that's 10 minutes and people have an amazing experience. Or I've done them when they've been 2 hours, but it is that taking people through this, and their bodies, they just go. It's like something inside of them will take them exactly where they need to go to access information that's going to support them in that next catalyst for growth. It will provide them with some information, and we won't necessarily know all of what it's going to mean, because the first time, I can look back now and see how it's all connected to where I'm at right now, but I could never have gotten that from that first breath work. But it does give you enough that you travel essentially, or you go inward or you go outward. Some people go to the stars, some people go in their body, some people have a somatic experience. Sometimes there is the releasing, through the body itself wants to purge, something, but it gives us information. It's a wonderful tool to access what we might be resisting, what might be there waiting for us to connect with. And it moves energy in the body, and it's important. I think that what's really important is that the breath work helps, but it's equally, if not even more important, for them to process. It's important to process that information where somebody can hold space for you to support you and figuring this out for yourself. And then you begin to trust and learn to trust, because it's really, how do we relearn trust in our own bodies? Open that inner knowing. Okay, I can trust this. This is coming to me for me. And
yes.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. 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 We did an episode called Can I Trust Myself? And so trusting ourselves is something I talk about a lot. What's interesting, Carley, as you're sharing is, I did a session with Linda of the holotropic breath work 6 years ago at a conference in Sedona. And what was interesting is what came to me during that was white buffalo. And then what was even more interesting is we got home from that, and we we walked into Walker's space, and I had bought him this print like the year before of a buffalo covered in snow. And it was like, oh, well, white buffalo's been around for a little bit. So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how cool is that,
Yeah.
And the white buffalo, like the white lions or the white bears or the white reindeer, it's understanding that they have been held in a sacred place. And there's many different white and white crocodile, these are, carriers of light is one way to understand them, the frequency, or avatars that are here to hold space for us as we begin to go through these times of very fast, rapid evolution on the planet. And so they are these sacred beings and it's lovely that you had the white buffalo come to you, and it was already there.
Right. Yeah. Already there. Yeah. And just keeps showing up. Yeah.
I'm interested, when you've been to Africa and you talked about establishing energetic connection, so you gain learning from the animals. What's the process for establishing an energetic connection with animals?
It's one of the things that I learned through going to the White Lions, or going on some of these excursions, is to essentially be in a place of love and respect. And that is key. So being in, and being very, very present, so one of the things, that we have done, and I still really adhere to, is as much as possible when you're out there and connecting, to not have any distractions. You have your phone and you want to take pictures, which of course I am, guilty. I love to take pictures of these animals. I want to capture it. But the more present we can be, and that we drop down into our bodies and we open our hearts and we essentially establish a connection in our hearts from our heart to this animal's heart. And in that also we're communicating that we are here as, to be of service, not, because that's the another thing that's really important. It's like, I'm not here to take, because that's the other thing that we have really, we tend to want enlightenment. And it's never, it's always reciprocal. And that's one of the things that have come to me through the years. It's like, you can't have, it's always reciprocal. Can we make it conscious? Can we be in relationship with this animal and be in a way like, I am here to support you, and, and know that we are co-creating together. So I'm going to open my heart and I'm going to connect with your heart and establish a current of energy that is communicating that this authenticity is here. Because the purer our motives can be, it's like, that comes from a place of receptivity and, union and love and respect, I think is probably the best way to do it. Then we begin to receive messages, we begin to open up some of these barriers to that have blocked us from understanding the language frequency that has always been there for us. We think of like, we used to have the ability to communicate real directly through being able to read the frequencies and interpret, but it's been more blocked. So in that moment for us, if we can go into it consciously, and that's what we bring to that moment, we're going to bring in March this year, is like having a respectful relationship with the animals, with the land, because there's a frequency in the land, with the trees, with the plants, with the rivers, with all of this. It will be being in right relationship, being in a place of honoring and respecting where they are. And then we get, people get messages. Different people have different gifts and abilities, but we all then receive. The hard part then is to trust what we get, because, can we receive it without being, in our own, messiness of that ego's interpretation.
Yes. Oh, we talk about the messy a lot, Carley, for sure.
Yeah. Yes. So, that's essentially what it's doing, is being present. And then it's watching for the signs, because they communicate with us, which is just phenomenal. They will show up. The most profound one, it's like, we wanted to be with the elephants. Or not most profound. There were so many profound ones. But I told this one yesterday, and I'm only telling it briefly, but it's like, our group was like, we wanted to be with the elephants. They wanted to be with the elephants. And when we spoke into doing it consciously, all of a sudden no elephants appeared. And we were dealing with just the disappointment the members had, we wanted to do this consciously and not just barrier into the middle of a herd of elephants. We wanted to communicate with them heart to heart with presence. And then they don't show up. So processing our emotions was such a big piece. And then this surrender to say, okay, they may not show up. What do we need to honor in each of the participants? And so essentially we broke up into different groups. Once we all went through this really big process, and one group really wanted to go back out to search one more time to find the elephants, because it was our last night. And the others said, no, I want to energetically connect with them, and we're going to build an altar and just connect with them energetically. But we essentially allowed for right relationship.
Right.
You allow for right relationship in those moments. As soon as we made that decision, the lions started roaring. The lions roared and roared, and it felt like they were really, could get goosebumps on you.
Yeah.
I'm getting it too. Yeah. We were in an open area, and the lions were roaring. A group took off in the Jeep. The other group sat. We sat, and we on the outskirts of this huge open plain, sort of, with on the other side was where the actual national park was. But this is there's a big watering hole there. So we sat and we went into ceremony. I closed my eyes. And in that moment, I closed my eyes. I'm like, that inner knowing got activated. They're coming. And I opened my eyes and I saw in front of me 17 elephants. I counted them. 17 elephants running in front of me, stopping right in front of us. I don't remember how, it's like maybe it's not real close, obviously, but where we could see them,
Right.
They stopped so suddenly. It was like they kind of all fell into each other. And then they went into formation. They went into a circle, each with their heads together, all 17 elephants. And all the while the lions are roaring. And, there's more to the story because, they were informing us. They were working with us to communicate directly with us something that was really important for us to take in, even if we didn't understand it at the time. And it's continuing to work its way of how do we put our heads together here? This is also a medicine wheel, understanding it's a circle, right? And there's 17. So it's also about, this is a very sacred number also about balance. 7 + 1 is 8, which is about that balance. So there was just so much there. And that we were continually supported after the elephants left, the lions came back and they were with us the whole night, right outside our hut, roaring. And in the morning when I woke up to go out to see them, there was, because I felt like they were so close to, I couldn't sleep. They were like the little hairs on the back of my neck were like, they are right outside our window. But the next morning out in that watering hole was one dark-maned lion. And this is the area where Cecil the lion was killed by the dentist in Minnesota. I don't remember exact what year that was, but this was the area where Cecil was killed. And he was a dark-maned lion. So here, one dark-maned lion turned its head and looked back on us after it drank the water and went off into the park. So there is this intentional piece, but we need to also be really working with our own bodies and expectations and be conscious.
Yes. Yeah.
That is a beautiful story.
It is.
I love it. I love that. Oh my gosh. I'm getting some tears in my eyes. It's just so beautiful and so profound.
Yeah, it truly was a trusting learning moment, a teaching moment for me, and for all of us. But how do we work and navigate this inner knowing, and alchemy is, it's a process. We have to continually work with these, this is ongoing, process.
Yeah. The journey.
Yeah. If we could step outside of ourselves enough to be able to create that energy space that is allowing without all of our expectations and plans, right?
Yeah.
It is astounding how the animal world will respond. And maybe they wouldn't have come, and you could still have learning from that too, but they did.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. So
they did. And it's just,
and we just don't know, being able to hold both, like it's a possibility that they're not going to
that's
come.
right.
And we hold and accept and honor that. And the group that went out into the third Jeep, they too encountered a herd of elephants and had the most amazing experience. So when they came back, they were like so excited because we both choices were honored,
Right.
in the sense that we were connected. And I think this takes us back to that inner knowing. How do we trust that inner knowing? It's important to stay clear and process the emotions and the feelings that come up and make them conscious. And as we do that, we can then say yes. and move through that into, into trusting our inner knowing.
Yeah. Oh, Carley, the time goes by so fast. Two things. What is your current process that you use most frequently to help you be present when you are aware that you are not?
To slow down.
Mm.
It really is important for me to slow down. You mentioned how busy I am. I can use busyness to, that keeps myself disconnected. That when I take care of myself, to give myself some simple moments of silence or reflection, to take that time to go inward. And it's really an important one, or to do a breath work for myself, but really to slow way down and to breathe into it. I could think of the most recent decision, like to go to Lisbon to be a part of this workshop. Life was really busy, and it took me a moment to start to connect the dots. Like why to listen and then respond and then to trust. But in order to do that, I had to slow way down. And how do I want to say this? It's the pieces began to come together, and then as they became together, and I slowed down, synchronicities made it very easy for me to know that it was the right answer, that I needed to go. But the process itself was to go inward, to close my eyes, to breathe down into my belly, to pick a card, but from a conscious place,
Yeah.
Oracle card to get a message, to open that heart center, to see the bigger picture that, even though part of me is like those old stories come up, you can't do that, it is going back to that trust. But I think a big part of my process now is just to take a moment to slow down and to really listen, because it's there and it's guiding me.
Yeah.
So
Thank you. Anything you would like to share in regards to how people find you, or the books that you've written that you would like our listeners to have a
yeah.
little bit more information about?
I do have one book. I have it actually out so I can show it to people. So it's called Sacred Messengers of Shamanic Africa. Oh, you've got it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've been referring to it lately. It's like sometimes I have to look back and reread things that I wrote, and I wrote it along with
Yes.
Star Wolf, but a lot of it brings in that shamanic healing initiatory process, and as well as the significance of Africa. To find me, carleymattimore.com, CARLEY, Mattimore.com, or you can find me on the Ahara Spiritual Community. And it's Ahara Spirit. Ahara is AAHARA, spiritualcommunity.org. And Ahara means to breathe. So it's a Sanskrit word to mean to breathe. And it lists all the different offerings that we have. You can sign up for our newsletter, and it comes out. It's an e-newsletter. It comes out once a month, to know what kind of offerings they are. But if you just Googled me, you could find us. And we have a workshop coming up, an online one, actually, for anybody who's interested. I'm not sure when this is going out, but it starts next week.
Oh,
It's
wow.
called the lion, those core elements. It's lion and dragon. You can sign up for one or both, or they don't have to be in any particular order. If you can't get the week off, because one starts in the middle of the week, the other one is on the weekend. Dragon's on the weekend. You can sign up for dragon. And then we have our March trip to Africa. We're going to a week at Kruger National Park, and then a week in Zimbabwe to some of the sacred sites. and working with a Mandoro, a medicine man who's a good friend of ours, who is in constant prayer with the ancestors and the water nations and earth nations. So those would be the easiest ways to connect, and those are some upcoming things. SHIP is also coming up in November. If somebody's interested in coming and doing that with us, it's a beautiful process.
Mm,
And we have a
thank
wonderful
you.
community from all over. So thank you.
And then last thing, if there was an offering or a mantra that you would want to share with our listeners for them to, come away with this experience listening to you today, what might that be? What comes to mind again is that, is learning to trust. That you carry the wisdom inside of you. And it's always been there, and it will always be there. And the more we can drop down into that and to learn, to find that balance between that risk and that safety, it will bubble up to the surface and it will be your guide. It is a thread that connects all things in one's life. And so each step, understand that each step is the right step, and you are on the journey of your life, and more will be revealed as you begin to trust. Agreed. Thank you so much, Carley. This was wonderful.
Thanks, Carley.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the listeners, listening to these reflections, and I appreciate all the great questions. Thank you both for the work that you do, and trusting our knowing.
Yeah. Thank you too. It is really powerful work to learn to trust ourselves. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to explore life with you. We encourage curiosity, self-growth, and we strive to be more compassionate every day.